Hello and welcome to Channel's Book Club. My name is Olakunle Kasumo and it's great to be on this show again. Well, today is all about book distribution. When we talk about the book culture and the reading culture, we have to look into how people have access to books. This is major, very critical. And joining us on the show today to discuss this is no other person than Adedotun Eyinade. Adedotun, with his sister and wife-to-be at that time, formed Rovingheights, which is today a very important brand when it comes to distributing books and setting up of bookshops across the country. Now, let's get to meet with Adedotun Eyinade and then enjoy the conversation we had about book distribution in Nigeria and, of course, his own success story. Enjoy it.
Adedotun Eyinade is the co-founder and CEO of Rovingheights, a chain of bookstores in Nigeria. Adedotun co-founded Rovingheights alongside his sister Toby and his wife Bola in 2015. He holds a bachelor's degree in microbiology and a master's degree in public policy from the Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria, and the University of Oxford, United Kingdom. Adedotun currently sits on the board of the Commonwealth Drone Partnership and is a trustee of the Madiba Foundation for Good Governance. He joins Channel's Book Club to discuss book distribution, the bookshop culture, and the book business in Nigeria.
Adedotun, nice to have you on Channel's Book Club.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah.
We've been talking about this for a while. Finally, you're on.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be doing this finally. Like, you know, yeah, it's really nice to be in the studio. I'm a great fan of the Channel's Book Club.
Great.
I think I must commend you for what you're doing for the book industry in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. And I'm a big fan of yours too.
Wow, thank you so much. That means a lot for us.
No, I mean, what you have done over the years with Rovingheights and, you know, book distribution in Nigeria is impressive, because before you came in, there was quite a problem. But we'll come back to that. Let's speak a bit generally, and then we zero in on specifics and then your own story. You know, the book distribution issue in Nigeria, how big is it? And how significant is it?
It's probably like the biggest challenge, you know, in the book value chain in Nigeria. The fact that, you know, you have so many authors, you know, and from the perspective of a bookseller, we get as much as like 5-10 people writing us every day saying, I've published this book, I'd like you to sell.
Wow.
Yes, on the average. And then, you know, there are very few bookstores in the country, right? You know, so beyond the big cities like Lagos, Ibadan, you know, and even in those cities, like you don't have enough bookstores that are commensurate with the size of the population, right? You know, so that's one challenge. And then if you now live in book deserts, like places like Jalingo or Damaturu,
book deserts.
Yes, you know, you can find bookstores. You know, what you find will be stationery stores or stores that sell, you know, religious tracts, and that's not to say those things are bad, but, you know, or people that just sell pirated books. You know, you don't find bookstores that make effort to regularly update their inventory, and so it's one of the biggest challenge. Like in other climes, you know, you find, you know, bookstore chains, and you don't necessarily have to go to the West. You in places like, you know, South Africa, you know, Namibia, even in Kenya, you know, you find, you know, bookstores in, you know, in cities that sort of reflect the taste of their population. So I think it's one of the challenges that, you know, one of the most important challenges that the book industry in Nigeria, you know, needs to confront. You know, how do you ensure that you have more bookstores, you have, like, you know, distributors that can serve bookstores, you know, down to the last mile.
So there's a dearth of bookstores. Absolutely. In Nigeria. It seems as if it was better way back. I remember, you know, in the 80s, there were quite a number of bookstores or bookshops, you know, around. But right now, what you're saying is we've got a lot of authors. And by the way, we also experience that here on this show. We have a lot of authors who send us books, you know, I have this new book, you know, I'd like to be on the show. Yes. And all that. We have a lot. That was what made me to first realize, you know, that, hey, people write in Nigeria.
There's a lot of writing going on.
There's a lot of writing going on in Nigeria. You may not know if you don't run Rovingheights, or
Yes.
or you don't you're not on a show like this. But we get so many copies every day. But what you're saying is the distribution is poor.
Yeah. So we need to get to the point in this country where we have at least one or two or three, bookstore chains, right? That have footprints, at least in one, at least in state capitals. So if you have like a chain of bookstores that has, footprint in, maybe one or two or in every state capital, and I think we're getting there. And they don't necessarily have to be like huge, like, 500 square meter, 1,000 square meter, retail outlets. It might be just small enough to just meet the needs and reflect the reading taste of the people. So for instance, if you're in Kano and you think that there is a market for like, romance or even, the kinds of Hausa literature that, the people in those parts, then you could have one that is heavy on that. And if you're in places like, I imagine in Lagos where the reading taste is sort of very eclectic, people, are interested in all sorts of things. And you have like, neighborhood neighborhood bookstores in places like maybe Lekki, Festa, even Agege, where I grew up. And those days I used to worry that like, I couldn't find books until you have to, move down to maybe to the island, and the likes. So I think it's something that, the book industry in Nigeria needs, like, to see how, we can start to have like, number of bookstores. And I'm happy that's happening. That's some of the things that excites me. So I see people who are setting up bookstores in places like Benin, and then we're, trying to connect to them, and we're not seeing them as competitors, but we're seeing as partners, and we're sharing information to say, hey, this is how to navigate this challenge around sourcing. This is how to navigate issues around logistics. Don't make these mistakes. Like, so I think it's essentially, we need to get to that point where everyone in the book value chain is collaborating, sharing information, making introductions, and just ensuring that, we're able to serve the market. Because ultimately, like, if we have so many bookstores in Nigeria, the benefit would be for, not only the reading public, but also authors themselves. The publishers won't have to worry about how do I get my books, into the hands of readers. They know that there are bookstores who will do that job for them.
Is this what inspired you to start your company?
Yes.
Which is essentially, Rovingheights is essentially a book-selling, book distribution company, right?
Yes.
So is this gap what inspired you?
Absolutely. So, I think I need to give a great deal of credit to my co-founders, my sister Toby, and my wife, Bola.
So Toby, your sister, of course,
and Bola,
started the company together.
So the three of us.
Was Bola married to you then?
No, we're not.
You're dating then.
We're dating then, yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things to quickly add is that, like, when I was leaving university, I realized that the kinds of books I'd like to read, Nigerian literature, like particularly the newer voices, like the likes of Judibia, El Nukoya, who at that time were self-published authors. I couldn't find them even in the university bookstore. And so one of the things I decided to do was to sort of bring them to the campus, do a reading, and find creative ways to get those books into the hands of students. And that sort of like, got me thinking like, if in Ile-Ife, OAU, you couldn't even
find such books.
Like, how much more if you're living in a town without a university, like a university bookstore, a university, and so it was then, looking for ways to help initially self-published authors distribute their books. And then after a while, I got tired, and thankfully my sister was around, and then she was like, oh, let's start using social media. So we started, playing around with using like Instagram, Twitter to get people to be excited about books, mostly Nigerian literary works. And then, we realized that, for us, we will get a lot of credibility and more legitimacy if we started to open brick and mortar outlets. So we opened the first one in Surulere. The second one was, then I'd moved to Abuja, and then with my wife, and we opened the second outlet, the third outlet in Lagos, and then, currently we have 4 outlets. The fourth one is in Garki. So
you are basically creating a book chain, which you have alluded, repeatedly said was much needed, So basically, one brand with multiple stores across various places.
Yeah. So we're at number 4, and then the goal is to, as much as the economy can allow, and we get lots of inquiries from people from like, when are you coming to Port Harcourt? When are you coming to Ibadan? Like, oh, well, we'll get there someday, right? So we've grown organically thanks to the goodwill of the reading public, and one of the things that excite us is the fact that we also do, deliveries, right? Deliver books to, like we get deliveries to places like Aba, to Damaturu, to Yola, to Potiskum. And it tells us that, like, oh, perhaps there's a market in those places. Maybe we will not be able to get in those places, but I think that there's the fact that we've been able to achieve a bit of modest success with what we've done. I think it also inspires other people to also replicate the same.
There are a number of problems. There are a number of issues. There's a piracy issue, right? There's a piracy issue, which is affecting booksellers, authors, publishers. I mean, it practically destroys the whole chain. What have you observed? How has that impacted on what you do?
So one of the things that, when you step back and want to take a sort of a very informed view of piracy, you realize that it's speaking to two problems. One, the access challenge, and also the economic barrier. Pirates are solving two problems. The fact that there are no bookstores. So the only places where you could find books will be in traffic stores, in some parts of this country where in traffic.
I mean, easy access, roll
yeah,
down your glass
and then you can buy the book.
Buy a copy.
And then there's also an economic challenge, the fact that, the pirated copies are way cheaper. So most people would rather trade off the quality to say, hey, oh, the book is original, is 7,000 naira, but the pirated is 2,000 naira, so there's that challenge. But then there's also a segment of the market that is also very discerning, right? They would not buy pirated books. And I think that's the kind of audience that we want to serve, right? So we're very particular about the quality of the books we carry. We buy, directly from the publishers. We buy from the, accredited distributors, and then, we just want to be able to reach out to, that segment of the public that are interested in buying original prints. Now, the pirates are there. I think that we can, take them on. It's less for, those who are in charge of, enforcing copyright laws to go after them and take them on. But I think that as the economy becomes better, and as you start to achieve a bit of parity between, price of what is original and what is pirated, if the difference is like 200-300 naira or 500 naira, I think that people will go for the original. But as long as you have there's a huge, gap between the price of the original print and the pirated, copies, people, there's still that strong temptation for people who want to read but are poor, to go for, for the pirated ones.
What is the prospect of book business in Nigeria? Some people will argue that in the country where the reading culture is poor, what's the prospects? I mean, I'm talking now almost purely from a business perspective, the numbers.
So, to disabuse the minds of anyone who's, trying to crunch the numbers, it's not oil and gas, right? It's not a business that you're expecting huge, 100% returns. And I think that anybody who's interested in the book value chain has to be in love with books, right? It's like one of those businesses that you do because you love it, right? And so that's having said that, I would say, it's a business that has to be run just about the way you run any other retail business. The fundamentals are really, really important. And so I think that as long as you have, people who are literate, people who go through the 4 walls of schools, there would also always be a market for, for bookstores, and the next question would then be how commercially successful, would they be? So the challenge of that, challenge of viability or sustainability that bookstores confront in Nigeria, I don't think they're peculiar to Nigeria alone. Even in the US, even in, you find, the bigger chains like, Barnes and Nobles also struggling because of that, because they're having to face competition from the likes of Amazon, or just because, inflation or just how the businesses are run, right? So I think that, the bookstore business is also not immune from those other challenges. That question around the reading habits of Nigerians, I think we also need to interrogate that further. When people say Nigerians don't read, I think Nigerians read. People are on their phones 24/7. They're reading stuff. They're reading blog. They're reading all sorts of things. But then maybe the question we should be having is that how do we write things that would excite them the most, the more for them to read. People are reading lots of religious books. By the way, those things sells in hundreds of thousands of copies. I mean, in that genre, either for Islam or Christianity, and so how do we write things that people want to read? How do we, when we write those things, how do we get those beautiful books into the hands of readers? I think if we've explored all the options that are available, it's at that point I think we can give up to say, the book industry in Nigeria is dead.
Yeah, I think we have a data problem. There really is not. There has to be an improvement in the way data is gathered, and
I agree.
That's when we can really assess
Absolutely.
and come to reach some conclusions.
Absolutely.
Well, time is not our friend, Dotun. What do you read personally?
Yes, good question. So I'm constantly reading like 4 or 5 books at the same time, and I guess it's one of those things that comes with with being a bookseller. So I these days I read nonfiction. You find me reading things like politics. I read international affairs. So I'm currently reading a book about cobots. And how our phones are powered pretty much off the back, the blood and sweat of people in DR Congo. Beautiful book. Red Cobalt. Yeah, that's the title of the book. And so those are the kind. I read memoirs a lot. I read biographies. I say that my days of reading fiction is over, but I hope to start reading fiction again because I think that fiction has a way of humanizing us. So that's what you find. You likely find me reading fiction. I mean, non-fiction. Essays. I read lots of essays. I read lots of commentaries. Memoirs. Memoirs are my things. Yeah.
Whose memoir has impacted you the most?
Difficult question. I have these things for prison memoirs, and I think it's kind of crazy, like how I would say maybe Golan Archipelago. I think it will fit into that bracket of the Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I think it made a whole lot of difference. It really, sort of made a really lot of impression on me. And then something closer home, Mr. Kunle Ajibade's Jailed for Life. I read that book as an undergrad, and what it did for me was that I looked at all the books I read when he was, in jail, and I pretty much went all about looking for those books, just also wanting to read those books. So I have these things for memoirs.
Well done. Thank you, Dotun.
Yeah.
It's been nice having this chat with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. So much packed in there and so much more to discuss. Thought-provoking. Well, before we round up the show today, let's take a reading. Enjoy this.
Hello, I'm Tunde Akimbondere, an author and a public speaker at the same time. I am an author of several books, as a matter of fact. And this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about my latest book, which is the history of the students' unionism. I wrote this book last year during the month of August, and it was launched in Ondo State of Nigeria. The book is more of an exposition into the concept of unionism, especially as it operates in most of the tertiary institutions in this country. And it was actually forwarded by Mr. Femi Falana, SCN, a renowned human rights lawyer. I'm going to be reading the first chapter, or I'll start my reading from the first chapter. The beginning of higher education in Africa has been traced through different historical periods. One school of thought traces it to the abolition of slavery and the settlement of the freed slaves in Sierra Leone in 1787. This is linked with the establishment of the Furabe College in 1827. Graduates of Furabe College were said to have intensified struggles that led to the establishment of many higher institutions. Akintoye in the year 1973 traces the history of university education in Nigeria to the 19th century, when Nigerians found their way to Furabe College. Late Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowder was part of the first generation of blacks and of African descent to resume at the great Furabe College. Another school of thought argues that higher education in Nigeria started with the nationalist movements. What is certain is that university, as we know it today, has its ancestry in the Middle Ages in Europe with the revival of learning. The existence of university system also necessitated the introduction of students' unionism. It was Newman who made an attempt to conceptualize university in his 1854 classic, The Idea of a University. University, according to him, is one of the greatest and incessant occupations of human society, carried on partly with set purpose. He further asserts university as a place of communication and circulation of thoughts by means of personal intercourse through a wide extent of the country, a school of universal learning and knowledge of every kind. Now to students' unionism. Students' unionism goes as far back as 1925, when Ladipo Solanke, a London scholar, established the West African Students' Union alongside Professor Bankole Bright. This was an addendum to the Progressive Union created a year before, still by Ladipo, in partnership with Ami Ashregave. Ladipo Solanke had his education at the St. Andrews Training Institution and later Furabe College, Sierra Leone. He resumed at the University College Britain in 1923 and graduated in 1928. The ideal of WASU at this time was to fight colonialism, racism, colonial exploitation, political repression, including other social inequalities. With the aid of newspapers, magazines, and radio, WASU was able to propagate its cardinal objectives. WASU was equally able to incorporate its ideals into the university system, which enabled her to speak in the interest of the students, being a fragment of the academic setting. In Fafunwa's words, it was little more than a tutorial residential college, which caused its students for London external degrees in arts, science, agriculture, and medicine. The degree certificates issued by London University to successful candidates in Ibadan between 1952 and 1962 were not different in any way from those issued to private candidates. They both carried the phrase as an external student. There were 104 foundation schools, including 49 students in teacher training and survey courses, who began their courses at Ibadan on 18th January 1948. The formal opening took place on 25th March 1948, and in February 1948, University College London was allowed to enjoy a special relationship scheme. Owing to the time, I might not be able to proceed, and we'll have to actually conclude and draw the content on this note. But I'm still Tunde Akingbondere, the author of the History of Students' Unionism, Chronicling Unionism in Nigerian Universities, a case study of AUA. I'd like to be here some other time to at least do justice to more of what I've been able to read within the shortest period of time. Thank you.
Interesting. Well, this is where we have to end the show today. As always, we'll be delighted to get your feedback through any of our social media platforms displayed on your screen. My name is Olakunle Kasumu. Remember, one great book can change your life. Bye-bye.